Welcome, history fanatics, to Mrs. Heron's video playlist, where you will get the best of the best in social studies. Okay, we're in Unit 2, Ancient Egypt, What They Gave Us. Our goal is to analyze the Egyptian contributions to the modern world, and we're in Chapter 3, Ancient Egypt and Nubia. Okay, this time we're looking at Section 3, Egyptian Religion, and by the end of this section you should be able to answer the question, what role did religion play in ancient Egypt?
Neurons die quickly, so brains were a lost cause to ancient Egyptian mummifiers, which is why, according to Greek historian Herodotus, they started the process by hammering a spike into the skull, mashing up the brain, flushing it out the nose, and pouring tree resins into the skull to prevent further decomposition. Brains may decay first, but decaying guts are much worse. The liver, stomach, and intestines contain digestive enzymes and bacteria, which, upon death, start eating the corpse from the inside. So the priests removed the lungs and abdominal organs first. It was difficult to remove the lungs without damaging the heart, but because the heart was believed to be the seat of the soul, they treated it with special care. They placed the visceral organs in jars filled with a naturally occurring salt called natron. Like any salt, natron can prevent decay by killing bacteria and preventing the body's natural digestive enzymes from working. But natron isn't just any salt. It's mainly a mixture of two alkaline salts, soda ash and baking soda. Alkaline salts are especially deadly to bacteria, and they can turn fatty membranes into a hard, soapy substance, thereby maintaining the corpse's structure. After dealing with the internal organs, the priests stuffed the body cavity with sacks of more natron and washed it clean to disinfect the skin. Then, the corpse was set in a bed of still more natron for about 35 days to preserve its outer flesh. By the time of its removal, the alkaline salts had sucked the fluid from the body and formed hard brown clumps. The corpse wasn't putrid, but it didn't exactly smell good either. So priests poured tree resin over the body to seal it, massaged it with a waxy mixture that included cedar oil, and then wrapped it in linen. Finally, they placed the mummy in a series of nested coffins, and sometimes even a stone sarcophagus.
The mummification process that the video just described was to prepare a pharaoh for the journey to the afterlife, or the life after death in Egyptian religion. The god depicted in the video was Anubis, the Egyptian god of the dead. He was believed to have invented the mummification process. Despite the video's depiction of mummification being like a one-day job by one person, it was actually more like a 3-month job that took several Egyptian priests to complete. One of these priests would be in charge of chanting Egyptian prayers during the mummification, from an Egyptian religious book called the Book of the Dead. It was buried with the pharaoh along with many other personal belongings like food and jewelry, and even one pharaoh had his beloved cat sacrificed and mummified with him. And they believed that you would need to be buried with everything you needed in the afterlife. That way the pharaoh could make it into the afterlife. So they were often buried with all of their favorite possessions. Now, because mummification was such a long process, it took a lot of people, and only pharaohs could be mummified. Everybody else had to just be buried in the desert. No embalming, no preservation. Internal organs that were considered important for mummification were stored in little jars with 4 of the Egyptian gods' heads on them. These were called canopic jars. In ancient Egypt, they believed in many gods and goddesses, which is polytheistic. Some of these gods and goddesses were different in different parts of Egypt. However, there were some main gods. They were usually depicted as having a human body but an animal head. And some of the gods included Osiris, which was the god of the living and the dead and the afterlife. Osiris's wife, also his sister, I know, Isis, which was the god of love and motherhood. Their son, Horus, which was the god of the sky, and Amun-Re, that was the most supreme god, the god of the sun. He was believed to have watched over humans and judged their actions. And they even believed that with every sunrise in the east, he was born, and he would die with each sunset in the west. And for that reason, Egyptians didn't hardly go on the west bank of the Nile because they believed that it was haunted with the spirits of the dead. Okay, so back to mummification. While the bodies were being prepared for the afterlife, special skilled artisans would begin making the pharaoh's coffins. That's right, I said coffins, plural. The innermost coffin was called the sarcophagus. It was shaped like a human body, and it had the pharaoh's face painted on it as a burial mask. This was placed inside of a more traditional rectangular coffin, which was placed in another larger tomb. And that was placed in a royal tomb designed for the king or the queen. These royal tombs were huge. They were well decorated, and in the 4th dynasty, special artists were appointed to oversee the design and the architecture of the pyramids, many of which are still intact today. Now, the largest one in existence is called the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's 450 feet tall, which is 4 times larger than Niagara Falls. It has more than 2 million stones, each of them weighing about 5,000 pounds apiece. Now, imagine hauling just one of those bad boys up the side of the pyramid. So it took a lot of slaves to create these huge structures, and a lot of slaves died in the building of the pyramids. Each of them is unique, and they could take as many as 20 years to build, which is why the construction of the pyramids began as soon as you were named pharaoh. Now, remember how the west bank of the Nile was believed to be the land of the dead. So it makes sense that the pyramids were all placed on the west bank. Now, once you were buried in a royal tomb, it was sealed with secret passageways so that workers could escape, and special rooms designed to trap burglars from robbing the tomb. However, most tombs were still robbed and desecrated anyway. There was one exception. That was King Tut. It was found almost in pristine condition. Remember, King Tut, or Tutankhamun, was the son of the pharaoh Akhenaten. Today, these tombs are all that's left of this once great civilization. But eventually it was destroyed by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. And then 300 years later, the Romans took over as well. It wouldn't be for another 2,000 years that the Egyptians would gain their land back. To recap, we studied mummification, the afterlife, and the pyramids, specifically the Great Pyramid of Giza. Alexander the Great defeated the Egyptians in 332 BC, and then in 30 BC, the Romans overtook the Egyptians.